A fool is not simply someone who lacks knowledge. That's a misunderstanding. Many people think foolishness is about ignorance, but that's not the truth. In reality, the fool is not someone who doesn't know. The fool is someone who refuses to listen even when truth is shouting. He has access to the same wisdom, the same truth, the same voice of reason. But he shuts his ears, hardens his heart, and mocks what he should revere. He is not a victim of darkness. He is a volunteer of deception. He chooses blindness. He rejects light. He denies what he already knows to be right. That is what makes a man a fool. Foolishness is not the absence of truth. It is rebellion against truth. The fool is not trapped in the dark. He closes his eyes in the light. You can give him books, sermons, lessons, mentors, and even miracles. But he will still walk in destruction if he doesn't want to listen. He doesn't need more information. He needs a transformation of the heart. Because the issue is not the mind, it's the will. The heart of the fool is proud. It is stubborn. It cannot be led. It cannot be taught. And therefore, it cannot grow. There is a powerful lesson here. Wisdom is not automatic. It is not given to those with age or title or talent. Wisdom is given to the humble, the one who bows his ear and bends his pride, the one who understands that no matter how far he's come, he can still fall. That's the difference between the wise and the fool. The wise man knows he doesn't know everything. The fool thinks he already does. In every generation, in every nation, the greatest tragedies are not caused by the absence of information, but by the rejection of truth. Think about history. Leaders who had access to truth, but ignored it. Families that were destroyed not because they didn't know better, but because pride silenced their conscience. Marriages torn apart, not for lack of love, but for the refusal to forgive. Friendships lost, not because the truth wasn't spoken, but because one person refused to humble themselves and admit they were wrong. That's what a fool does. He hears the warning and laughs. He sees the danger and walks right in. He is told, turn around, but he speeds up. He doesn't just ignore the truth. He resents it. He mocks it. He treats it like an enemy. And that makes him dangerous, not just to himself, but to everyone around him. You see, when a man rejects wisdom, he doesn't just walk into destruction. He drags others with him. His children suffer. His friends suffer. His community suffers. Because a fool never falls alone. His pride becomes a curse that spills into every corner of his life. His decisions become chains for the innocent. His rebellion becomes a plague that touches every relationship. And yet, this is the urgency. He doesn't have to stay a fool. The tragedy of the fool is not just that he falls. The greater tragedy is that he doesn't get back up. The fool falls and refuses to learn. He stumbles, and instead of adjusting his steps, he blames the road. He gets hurt, but instead of changing course, he hardens his heart. He chooses stubbornness over transformation. This is the danger we face today, especially in an age where pride is promoted and humility is mocked. We live in a world that celebrates arrogance, where opinions matter more than truth, where feelings override facts, where being right is more important than being wise. But in that world, fools thrive, because the soil of pride produces the fruit of destruction. But wisdom is still crying out. The voice of truth is still calling even now. And it's not calling the perfect. It's calling the teachable, not the talented, but the humble. Because wisdom is not given to the loudest voice or the most confident speaker. It is given to the quiet heart that says, teach me. That heart may have failed yesterday, but it will rise in power today. That heart may have been blind, but now it sees. That heart may have walked in pride, but now bows in surrender. So ask yourself, do I reject wisdom when it comes? Do I shut my ears when someone corrects me? Do I fight against truth when it points out my flaws? Do I justify my actions instead of repenting for them? Do I walk with confidence while ignoring the cliff I'm heading toward? Because if the answer is yes, then you are choosing foolishness. Even if you call yourself wise, even if you wear the title, even if people applaud you, true wisdom is not proved by applause, it is proved by the fruit. It shows up in discipline, in listening, in repentance, in peace, in humility. So let us not be like the fool who hears and hardens his heart. Let us not be those who laugh at correction and walk into disaster. Let us choose the higher path, the narrow road, the way of humility, the way of wisdom. Because in the end, foolishness is not about intelligence. It's about attitude. It's not about whether you know, it's about whether you are willing to listen. And when you stop listening, you stop growing. When you stop growing, you start dying. But when you humble yourself and listen again, even if it hurts, that's where change begins. So today, wisdom is crying out again. Not in the thunder, not in the earthquake, but in the quiet conviction of your heart. Will you hear it? Will you respond? Or will you walk away and remain unchanged? The choice is yours. Wisdom is offered freely, but it is only received by those who are ready to let go of pride and grab hold of truth. And that is the difference between a fool and a man of destiny. The first sign of a fool is arrogance. Pride is the soil in which foolishness grows. It is not merely an attitude, it is a posture of the heart that says, I know better, even when every sign, every voice, and every truth points in another direction. Pride blinds a man. It deceives him into thinking he is wise, even as he walks straight into destruction. He becomes confident, but his confidence is without foundation. He walks with swagger, but he's heading toward a cliff. That is the danger of pride. It gives the illusion of strength while preparing you for a fall. A fool is not humbled by knowledge. He is puffed up by it. Even a little understanding becomes a weapon in the hands of the arrogant. He uses information not to learn, but to control, to boast, to argue. Instead of allowing truth to shape him, he reshapes the truth to serve his ego. He becomes selective in listening. He only hears what confirms his bias. He surrounds himself with voices that agree with him and rejects any voice that challenges him. To him, correction is an attack, not a gift, and so he builds walls instead of bridges. He isolates himself in the illusion of superiority. The tragedy is that pride makes a man unteachable. You can pour out wisdom like rivers before him, but he will not drink. You can plead, warn, show the scars of your own mistakes, and still he will mock and dismiss it. Because in his own eyes, he is already right. He becomes a prisoner to his own ego. He's unable to admit weakness, unable to apologize, unable to say, I was wrong. And without those three words, without the humility to acknowledge failure, transformation becomes impossible. Many lives have been ruined, not by great evil, but by simple pride. A father who refuses to admit he was too harsh. A leader who cannot say he made a mistake. A husband who won't humble himself to understand his wife. A student who mocks the teacher because he thinks he knows better. Pride doesn't need a storm to destroy a life. It just needs a heart that refuses to bow. Even worse, arrogance often disguises itself as confidence. But there's a great difference. Confidence is rooted in truth. Arrogance is rooted in denial. Confidence listens, learns, and adjusts. Arrogance silences others and pushes forward blindly. Confidence walks with awareness. Arrogance walks with assumption. And assumption is the enemy of growth. In spiritual terms, pride is even more dangerous, because the proud heart cannot submit. Not to people, and certainly not to God. It resists authority. It challenges divine wisdom. It treats God's word as optional. The fool sees the law of the Creator and thinks he knows better. He calls conviction old-fashioned, calls discipline toxic, calls submission weak. But in doing so, he cuts himself off from the very power that could save him. Pride not only distances a man from others, it distances him from his own purpose. And the worst part, the fool often doesn't know he's proud. Pride is self-deceptive. It covers itself with good intentions, masks itself with knowledge, hides behind charm and charisma. But time reveals the truth, because pride cannot sustain growth. It cannot foster peace. It cannot nurture love. Eventually the mask cracks, the relationships break, the fruit rots, and the fool is left wondering why nothing works, never realizing it was his pride that poisoned everything. But there is still hope, even for the fool. Because while pride builds walls, humility tears them down. And humility begins with a choice to stop defending yourself and start examining yourself. A choice to ask, what if I'm wrong? A choice to welcome correction, even if it stings. A choice to prioritize truth over ego, growth over comfort, healing over being right. That choice does not come easy. It requires pain, it requires surrender, but it is the door to wisdom. The greatest men and women in history were not those who never failed. They were those who were willing to admit failure, learn from it, and rise stronger. They were not flawless, but they were humble. They surrounded themselves with counselors, accepted rebuke, and walked in accountability. They feared pride more than failure, and because of that, They succeeded where others fell. So examine yourself. Are you offended easily when someone corrects you? Do you interrupt when people offer a different perspective? Do you always need to have the last word? Do you see apologies as weakness? Do you hide your insecurities behind sarcasm or silence? These are not signs of strength. They are signs of pride, and they are the cracks that lead to collapse. To be wise, you must be broken. Broken of the need to be right, the need to be praised, the need to be in control. Wisdom comes not when we shout, but when we listen. Not when we boast, but when we bow. Not when we command others to follow, but when we learn to follow truth ourselves. And truth is not intimidated by questions, but it does not bend to pride. It remains still, waiting to be found. Not by the arrogant seeker, but by the humble one. Because truth is not a prize for the loud, it is a reward for the surrendered. Let it be said of you, not that you were always right, but that you were always willing to be corrected. That you were not driven by pride, but drawn by purpose. That you didn't walk in arrogance, but in wisdom. That you had the courage to bow so that you could rise. For in the end, the fool will fall by his own pride, but the humble will be lifted, not because they were strong, but because they were willing to become weak before truth, and in that weakness they were made wise. A fool repeats his mistakes. This is not a statement of accident, it is a pattern of the heart. The fool doesn't simply stumble once or twice. He walks in circles, returning again and again to the very thing that broke him. He doesn't fall by surprise, he falls by habit. He repeats his choices not because he's unaware of the consequences, but because he refuses to learn from them. He sees the signs, hears the warnings, feels the pain, and still chooses the same path. This is the mark of foolishness. Not failure, but failure without growth. To fall is human, to learn is wisdom, but to fall and never learn, that is the very definition of a fool. Life will knock us all down. No one escapes hardship. No one walks through life without scars. But those who are wise see failure as a teacher. They reflect, they repent, they adjust. They ask the painful questions: what went wrong? What did I miss? What can I do differently next time? But the fool does not ask, he does not reflect, he does not change, he blames everything else. The situation, the people, the timing, but never himself. And so, the lesson is never received. The door to wisdom stays shut. The reason the fool repeats his mistakes is that he refuses to take responsibility. He avoids the mirror. He avoids the hard truth that perhaps the problem is not always the world around him, but the choices within him. Until a man confronts his own decisions, he will live in cycles. Destructive relationships, broken finances, moral failure, spiritual dryness. These things repeat themselves not because the world is against him, but because he refuses to confront what is inside him. A fool may even appear to have insight. He can explain his actions. He can justify his patterns. He may even use impressive words to cover his lack of change. But wisdom is not proven by words. It is proven by fruit. And when the same mistakes bear the same bitter fruit over and over again, no amount of talk can mask the truthing. This is a person who has not learned. There's a story in every life, a place where we keep returning. For some it's anger, for others lust, for some it's laziness, for others it's pride. The fool doesn't just struggle with these things, he surrenders to them. He stops fighting, he normalizes them, he calls them just part of who I am. But that is not identity, that is bondage. To repeat your mistakes and call it identity is to chain yourself to destruction and rename it destiny. And here's the dangerous part. Every time a fool repeats a mistake, it becomes easier to justify. The pain dulls, the conviction fades, the voice of conscience becomes quieter. What was once a sharp warning becomes background noise. The heart hardens, the cycle deepens, and what once felt like a mistake now feels like a lifestyle. That is how strongholds are formed, through repetition without repentance. But God did not design us to live in cycles of defeat. He designed us to grow, to rise, to learn. Every mistake contains a lesson. Every failure carries a seed of wisdom. Every scar has a story that can protect us in the future. But that protection only comes if we are willing to look back honestly, to confront what went wrong, and to choose differently the next time. That is growth. That is maturity. That is wisdom. You can see this truth in nature. A tree that bends during a storm will grow stronger if it survives. Its roots dig deeper. Its trunk becomes more resilient. But if the tree is struck and continues to lean, refusing to adjust, eventually it will fall, not because of the storm, but because of its refusal to change. The same is true of people. Storms come to all, but the fool bends the same way every time. He refuses to dig deeper. He refuses to strengthen his foundation, and so he falls again. Not because the storm was stronger, but because he never grew. What makes this even more tragic is that many fools are not fools in every area. A man can be wise in business but foolish in relationships. A woman can be strong in discipline but weak in emotional choices. Wisdom must be whole. It must touch every part of our lives. Otherwise, we will repeat mistakes in hidden places while appearing wise in public. But the damage always starts in the hidden places. That's where the cycles begin. That's where the choices are made that no one sees. And if we do not face them, they will eventually rise to the surface and expose us. The wise man asks, "Why am I here again? Why am I facing the same pain? Why do I keep choosing the same kind of people, the same reaction, the same failure?" He doesn't run from the question. He embraces it. He understands that pain is a messenger, not an enemy. That failure is a mirror, not a sentence. And that growth begins when we stop blaming and start owning. To repeat your mistakes is to waste your pain. Pain is one of life's greatest teachers. It doesn't lie, it doesn't flatter, it tells you something is wrong. But if you ignore it, numb it, or blame it on others, you will never learn what it came to teach. You will keep walking in circles, thinking you're going forward, only to end up in the same place again. There's an urgency to this message because time doesn't wait. Every repeated mistake steals a piece of your future. Every cycle of foolishness wastes the opportunity for growth. Every time you go back to what broke you, you delay your destiny. There comes a moment when you must decide, will I keep walking in circles, or will I break the cycle? Will I keep falling the same way, or will I rise differently this time? Breaking the cycle takes courage. It takes humility. It takes the honesty to admit that you've made choices that led you here, and the faith to believe that you can choose differently going forward. It doesn't matter how many times you've fallen. What matters is whether you're willing to learn from it now. The fool says, "It's just who I am." The wise say, "It's who I was, but it's not who I have to be." There is power in that decision. Power to rewrite your story. Power to turn your scars into wisdom. Power to step out of cycles and into calling. But that power is only released when you refuse to repeat what you know is wrong. When you take the lesson, not just the pain. When you choose growth, not excuses. So look at your life, identify the pattern, expose the lie, ask the hard questions, and then make the change. Don't waste another year walking in circles. You were not created to repeat defeat. You were created to rise, to overcome, to become something greater than your past. And that journey begins the moment you say, "No more." The fool repeats his mistakes, but you don't have to. One of the clearest signs of a fool is his contempt for correction. He despises discipline. He resents rebuke. He sees guidance as an insult, not a gift. In the eyes of a fool, anyone who points out his error becomes an enemy. He does not understand that correction is a pathway to growth, a doorway to transformation. Instead, he mocks it, avoids it, or attacks it. And in doing so, he shuts out the very process that could elevate his life. Correction is not punishment, it is protection. It is the voice that calls you away from danger. It is the warning that prevents disaster. But the fool sees no value in being told he's wrong. His pride twists correction into rejection. He personalizes every critique. Even when spoken in love, he hears only judgment. He sees only shame. And because he cannot separate instruction from insult, he turns away from wisdom again and again. This is why fools cannot grow. Growth requires change, and change requires feedback. You cannot become better without knowing what needs to be improved. You cannot move forward if you ignore what's holding you back. Correction is the light that reveals the cracks in your foundation. It exposes the weak spots, the blind spots, the areas of compromise. But a fool would rather stumble in the dark than admit there is a flaw in his ways. Correction is not always comfortable, but it is always necessary. The wise man invites it. He seeks counsel. He asks for honest feedback. He listens, even when it hurts, because he understands that truth is more valuable than pride. He would rather be wounded by honesty than comforted by deception. He would rather be corrected now than destroyed later. But the fool takes the opposite path. He surrounds himself with flatterers. He gathers people who tell him what he wants to hear. He lives in an echo chamber where every voice affirms his choices, no matter how destructive they are. And when a voice of truth breaks through the noise, he silences it. He calls it judgmental. He calls it negative. He calls it disrespectful. But what he is really doing is rejecting the hand that's trying to pull him out of the pit. Even worse, the fool often disguises his rejection of correction as strength. He says, "I don't let anyone tell me what to do." He calls it independence. He calls it self-confidence. But true strength is not proven by resistance to correction. It is revealed in submission to wisdom. It takes more strength to listen than to argue. It takes more courage to admit wrong than defend pride. The fool confuses stubbornness with boldness, but there is nothing bold about walking off a cliff because you refuse to heed a warning. This is why the fool remains trapped. He makes the same poor decisions but refuses to accept feedback. He pushes away every opportunity to adjust. He falls, blames others. He fails but denies responsibility. And so the cycle continues. Without correction, there is no growth. Without rebuke, there is no real change. There is a powerful truth that must be accepting. Correction is not a sign of rejection. It is a sign of love. Parents correct their children because they love them. Teachers correct students because they care. Coaches discipline athletes because they want them to win. God disciplines those he loves, not to punish, but to refine, to strengthen, to shape into purpose. But the fool sees all correction as condemnation. He misinterprets love as attack. And in doing so, he cuts himself off from one of the greatest blessings in life: wise counsel. If you look at the downfall of many great men and women, you'll find this thread running through their stories. They stopped listening. They rejected correction. They got too big, too proud, too untouchable. They silenced the voices that once guided them, and in their isolation, they made decisions that led to ruin. You see, the higher you rise, the more correction you need. The greater the responsibility, the more accountability becomes essential. But the fool does the opposite. He grows in influence but shrinks in humility. Correction is not always external either. Sometimes it comes from within, from conscience, from the gentle tug of conviction. But even then, the fool resists. He explains away the guilt. He numbs the voice. He distracts himself with noise and business. But the whisper remains. The warning lingers. And every time he rejects it, his heart becomes just a little harder, until one day he no longer feels the conviction at all. This is the danger of ignoring correction. It deadens the soul. It sears the conscience. It turns a sensitive heart into stone. What was once a subtle prompt to turn away from wrong becomes silence. And when that silence settles in, destruction is near. Because a man who cannot be corrected is a man who cannot be saved. The wise receive correction with gratitude, even when it stings. They understand that it is better to be hurt by truth than destroyed by comfort. They know that discipline today prevents regret tomorrow. They know that every rebuke, if received with humility, is a step closer to wisdom. So examine yourself honestly. How do you respond when someone challenges you? Do you shut down? Do you argue back? Do you walk away offended? Or do you listen, consider, and grow? Your reaction to correction reveals your posture before truth. It reveals whether you are moving toward wisdom or sinking into folly. You must ask yourself, have I surrounded myself with truth-tellers or just cheerleaders? Do I allow people to speak into my life, even when it's uncomfortable? Do I listen when God corrects me through His Word, through circumstances, through the quiet voice within? Or do I push it all away in defense of my pride? Your future will be shaped by your answer. Because destiny is not built by perfection, but by correction. No one walks the path without stumbling. But the wise rise again, because they let correction do its work. They allow the sharp edges of truth to shape them into something greater. They become stronger not by avoiding failure, but by learning from it. But the fool refuses all of it. He believes he is above instruction. He mocks wisdom. He closes his ears. And in doing so, he chooses a path of destruction. Not because he didn't have access to truth, but because he despised the very tool that would have saved him. You were not created to be a fool. You were not born to reject truth. You were made to grow, to rise, to become wise. But that journey can only begin when you welcome correction. Not as a threat, but as a treasure. because those who embrace discipline will walk in honor, but those who despise it will dwell among the ruins of their own pride. The fifth mark of a fool is that he speaks more than he listens. His mouth is always open, but his ears are closed. He is quick to speak, but slow to understand. In every conversation, he dominates, interrupts, and asserts himself, not to learn, but to be heard. For the fool, talking is not a means of communication, but a display of self-importance. He talks to impress, not to inquire. He talks to defend himself, not to discover truth, and in doing so he reveals the depth of his folly. For wisdom is often silent, but foolishness is loud. A fool believes that the loudest voice wins. He sees every dialogue as a competition. He measures strength by volume, not by substance. He equates speech with power, not realizing that true power lies in restraint. The fool interrupts because he cannot wait. He cannot handle silence. He fears it because silence demands listening, and listening requires humility. And humility is something the fool cannot tolerate, so he fills the air with words, drowning out wisdom, silencing instruction, pushing away correction with the noise of his own ego. Listening is an act of humility. It is an admission that someone else may know something you do not. It is an open door to new understanding, but the fool has already made up his mind. He does not listen to understand, he listens to respond. And often, he doesn't even wait to respond, he cuts off, talks over, and dismisses. This reveals not only arrogance, but insecurity. The fool speaks so much because he fears what silence might reveal about himself. He uses words to build a wall between himself and truth. There is deep wisdom in restraint. A wise person weighs words. He considers the impact of his speech before opening his mouth. He speaks only after he has listened, only after he has understood, only when his words are necessary and helpful. His words are few, but they are powerful. They build up. They bring clarity. They carry weight. The fool, by contrast, floods every space with empty noise. His words are many but meaningless. He is driven not by truth but by impulse, not by wisdom but by emotion. When a fool speaks, he often reveals more than he intends. His words expose the shallowness of his understanding, the chaos of his thoughts, the disorder of his heart. He may believe he sounds wise, but to the discerning his speech is a mirror of his immaturity. He gossips because he lacks discipline. He argues because he lacks peace. He boasts because he lacks identity. He lies because he lacks the courage to face truth. Every careless word adds to the evidence of his foolishness. Words carry power. They shape reality. They can build or destroy, heal or wound, clarify or confuse. The wise understand this, and so they treat speech with reverence. But the fool plays with words like a child plays with fire, recklessly, selfishly, destructively. He speaks without thinking. He makes promises he cannot keep. He offers opinions without knowledge. He passes judgment without compassion. He shares secrets that were meant to be kept. And then he wonders why his relationships break, why trust is lost, why his words fall to the ground without impact. A fool does not know when to be quiet. He speaks in moments that call for silence. He inserts himself into matters he does not understand. He gives advice when none was asked for, and when it is asked, he often gives the wrong kind, because his speech is not rooted in truth or experience. It is rooted in the need to be heard. He cannot discern timing. He lacks sensitivity. He speaks first and thinks later, but by then the damage is done. There are times when silence is the most powerful response, when words will only make things worse, when listening will accomplish far more than talking ever could. But the fool fears silence. He fills every gap with chatter, every pause with opinion. He feels that being silent makes him invisible, that not speaking means weakness. But it is the opposite. It takes strength to be still. It takes maturity to hold your tongue. It takes wisdom to say nothing when everyone expects you to speak. The fool also uses speech to manipulate. He flatters to gain favor. He exaggerates to gain attention. He lies to escape responsibility. His words are not sincere. They are tools of self-preservation and self-promotion. But in the end, those words betray him. Because manipulation always comes to light, lies unravel, flattery fades, and those who once listened begin to see through the mask. The fool may fool people for a time, but not forever. Eventually, the emptiness of his words will be exposed. One of the great dangers of speaking too much is that it leaves no room for reflection. The fool talks so much, he never pauses to consider whether what he said was true, helpful, or necessary. He does not revisit his words. He does not learn from past conversations. He leaves behind a trail of careless speech, broken trust, and missed opportunities for real connection. Because he is so full of his own voice, he cannot hear the voice of wisdom. The wise practice the art of listening. They ask questions before they give answers. They seek to understand before they seek to be understood. They listen not only to words, but to tone, to silence, to what is not being said. They know that people reveal themselves most not when they talk, but when they are truly heard. And so the wise become safe places. They become trusted. Their words matter because they do not speak often, but when they do, it brings life. We must learn to hold our tongues, to pause, to weigh our words, to ask ourselves, is this true? Is this kind? Is this necessary? Am I speaking out of pride or purpose, out of love or insecurity, out of wisdom or reaction? We must create space for listening, not only to people, but to God. His voice is often quiet. His direction is often subtle. And if we never learn to quiet our own noise, we will miss his voice entirely. The fool in his multitude of words cannot hear heaven. His own voice drowns out the whisper of the Spirit. He prays, but only to talk. He studies, but only to speak. He never listens for divine correction, for guidance, for truth. And so his spiritual life becomes just as shallow as his conversations. No depth, no transformation, just noise. To be wise is to be slow to speak and quick to listen. To speak when it builds, not when it tears. To use words as tools of healing, not weapons of pride. To know when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to simply be present. There is power in restraint. There is strength in stillness. There is wisdom in silence. So ask yourself, do I listen more than I speak? Do I interrupt? Do I talk over others? Do I value the voices around me, or do I dismiss them? Do my words bring clarity or confusion, peace or conflict, truth or flattery? What is the impact of my voice on those closest to me? The answer to these questions will reveal whether you are walking the path of wisdom or stumbling in the folly of unchecked speech. Because the fool is known by his many words, but the wise are remembered for the words they chose not to say. The sixth mark of a fool is his inability to discern the times and seasons of life. He walks through the world blind to the shifts in the spiritual atmosphere, unaware of what is unfolding around him. While the wise person senses the moment, understands the urgency, and responds with reverence, the fool continues as if nothing matters beyond his present pleasure and convenience. The fool misses the signs. He ignores the warnings. He laughs at what should cause trembling. He plays when he should be preparing. He sleeps when he should be awake. This blindness is not simply physical but spiritual. It is a blindness of heart and soul, a refusal to see. There are moments in life that carry weight, divine timings, spiritual callings, warnings of judgment, or opportunities for transformation. These moments are sacred. They are windows of decision. But the fool treats them as ordinary. He shrugs off the call. He delays repentance. He postpones obedience. He says later, when heaven is saying now. And with every delay, the window begins to close. He believes he has time, but he does not understand that time is not in his hands. The fool treats time as endless, but the wise know it is precious, fleeting, and holy. A fool cannot interpret what God is doing because his eyes are fixed only on the surface. He is distracted by pleasure, by entertainment, by trivial things. He is obsessed with trends and news and gossip, but he is ignorant of eternity. While the heavens declare the glory of God, he scrolls endlessly through noise. While the world is shaking, he is numbing himself with comfort. While prophetic signs unfold, he is blind to the hour. He lives as if the world will continue forever, unaware that the age is passing and the call to awaken has already sounded. The wise understand that life moves in seasons, and every season demands a different response. There is a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to speak and a time to be silent, a time to build and a time to tear down, a time to weep and a time to rejoice. But the fool treats every moment the same. He does not adjust. He does not prepare. He does not respond with discernment. So he tries to sow in harvest season and reap in drought. He speaks when silence would have protected him. He laughs when he should be mourning. He is out of rhythm with reality. His timing is always off. There is a divine rhythm to life, a pulse that echoes through history. When you walk in step with that rhythm, you find grace, you find wisdom, you find destiny. but the fool walks out of sync. He stumbles because he is disconnected from the eternal. He has not trained his ear to hear the voice of the Spirit. He has not tuned his heart to God's calendar. He lives in reaction. And so he is constantly caught off guard by crisis, by consequence, by opportunity missed. The fool says, "I'll get right tomorrow," but tomorrow is not promised. The fool says, "I have time to change," but the door may soon be shut. The fool says, "Nothing has happened yet, so nothing will." But judgment does not always come suddenly. Sometimes it builds slowly. Sometimes it waits, grace holding back the tide. But the fool mistakes that delay for permission to continue in rebellion. He confuses patience with approval. And so, when the reckoning comes, he is unprepared. There are seasons when heaven calls us to urgency. When the moment is not one to debate, but to act, to repent, to return, to surrender. But the fool is always waiting for a more convenient time. He is always looking for a feeling, a sign that suits his comfort. But the truth is, God often speaks at inconvenient times. He calls us in the midst of our business. He disrupts our comfort. He knocks when we're asleep. And if we are not listening, if we do not discern the hour, we will miss him. Spiritual discernment is not about guessing the future. It is about knowing the heart of God in the present. It is about understanding his ways, sensing his movement, responding to his voice. The wise discern not only what is happening, but what it means. They ask, "What is God saying in this? What is required of me in this season? Where is his Spirit leading?" The fool never asks such questions. He drifts, he wanders, he reacts, but he never discerns. History is filled with those who missed their moment, entire generations that refused to listen, nations that ignored warnings, leaders who chose pride over humility, churches that chose tradition over truth, people who delayed surrender until it was too late. The Bible is clear: those who fail to discern the times are often swept away by them. They are not destroyed by lack of resources, but by lack of awareness. They were not ready, not because they could not be, but because they chose not to be. We live in a world filled with distractions, and every distraction numbs us to the urgency of eternity. The fool allows himself to be lulled to sleep by comfort, by entertainment, by self. But the wise remain awake. They watch, they listen, they guard their hearts. They stay alert to the movements of God, to the shifting winds, to the sound of approaching footsteps. They do not live in fear, but in holy awareness. They are prepared, not just for crisis, but for calling, not just for judgment, but for glory. God is always speaking. He speaks through creation, through his word, through conviction, through history, through people, through events. But the fool does not listen. He is too busy, too distracted, too proud, so he misses the divine message written in the ordinary. He misses the trumpet sounding in the distance. He walks into storms unprepared, not because there was no warning, but because he refused to hear. There are moments in life when everything can change, when the right decision opens a destiny and the wrong one closes a door. The wise discern these moments. The fool dismisses them. He does not recognize sacred ground even when he's standing on it. He does not see the value of a window until it has closed. And once it is closed, no amount of regret can reopen it. Discernment requires intimacy with God. You cannot discern what you do not recognize. You must know his voice. You must know his heart. And that means walking closely with him, daily, humbly, obediently. The fool resists intimacy because it demands change. It demands awareness. And awareness demands response. But the wise lean in, they draw close, they seek his face not just for answers, but for understanding, and in that understanding they see what others miss. Now is the time to awaken, to shake off the slumber, to stop playing the fool, to stop delaying what heaven has already commanded. This moment is not just another day, it may be a turning point. This decision may shape your legacy. This warning may be the last before the shaking. You must not ignore the signs. You must not assume you have forever. Eternity is real. The kingdom is near. The time is now. The fool sees no urgency because he lives only for himself. But the wise live with eternity in view. They understand that time is a gift and each moment is an invitation to obey, to surrender, to grow, to respond. The fool wastes the moment. The wise redeem it. Let it not be said of you that you missed your moment, that you walked blind while others saw, that you played while others prayed, that you stayed silent when you were called to speak, that you delayed obedience and missed destiny. Let it be said that you discerned the time, that you rose when others slept, that you heard when others ignored, that you responded with faith, with boldness, with urgency, because the times are not neutral, the hour is late, and heaven is calling for those who will no longer live as fools, but who will walk in wisdom, discernment, and truth.